There is something moving through your backyard, birds, right now that you cannot see, and it started in a rat. I want you to picture what that looks like. Somewhere in your neighborhood, 2 or 3 houses down, maybe across the alley, maybe under the deck of the rental property on the corner, there is a rodent bait station, or there was one recently enough to matter. A rat found it. The rat ate what was inside, and the rat did not die immediately, because that is not how these chemicals work. It moved around for another 3 to 7 days. It foraged, it crossed yards, and somewhere in that window, something caught it. A Cooper's hawk cutting low over a fence line, a great horned owl working the neighborhood at 3 in the morning, a red-tailed hawk that sits on the utility line 2 streets over and knows exactly which properties have a rodent problem because it has been watching them for years. That predator ate a rat that had already consumed a lethal accumulation of brotificum, a second-generation anticoagulant rodenticide designed to kill rats. It doesn't stay in the rat. I've been watching a Cooper's hawk come through my yard in Northern Virginia for going on 3 winters now. It comes in from the north, low over the back fence, usually in the morning, but sometimes in the afternoon. And the yard, every bird in it, goes quiet in a specific way that is different from every other kind of quiet. Cardinals gone. Chickadees drop to the center of the holly bush. Even the mourning doves, which I have always assumed were the last species to notice anything, are gone before the hawk lands. I have been looking forward to seeing that hawk, and I've spent the last year learning something about it that I genuinely don't know what to do with yet. Welcome to the channel. I'm Daniel. I've been paying close attention to a small suburban backyard in the DC suburbs for about 5 years now, and I'm still regularly finding out things that change the way I understand what I'm looking at on a normal Tuesday morning. If you're new here, subscribe before you leave. Stay until the end, because the last thing I want to say today is about that hawk, and I've been sitting on it for months. Today, I want to walk you through exactly how rat poison and pesticides are moving through the birds in your yard, not in the abstract, the actual mechanism, what the research shows, what you can realistically do about it, and what it means to be a backyard birder once you know how all of this works. Let's start with what is actually happening. There are 2 separate problems running in parallel in most suburban neighborhoods in the eastern United States, and they are killing birds through completely different pathways. The first is secondary rodenticide poisoning. This is what I was just describing. Rat poison doesn't stay where you put it. You put it in a bait station by the garage or under the porch or in the crawl space, and a rat eats it and doesn't die immediately and gets eaten by a Cooper's hawk that has learned which properties in your neighborhood have active rodent populations, by a great horned owl working your street at 3 in the morning on a January night when the temperature is 11 degrees and everything that moves is worth hunting, by an eastern screech owl you have probably never seen in 10 years of looking out the back window, sitting in the oak in the corner of your yard and perfectly invisible, by an American crow, which is opportunistic enough to take a slow-moving rodent it wouldn't bother with otherwise. All of these animals are present in or near your yard in ways you may not fully realize. All of them are at the end of a chain that starts with that bait station 3 doors down. The second pathway is pesticides, primarily systemic insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, and the damage here is in some ways harder to see because it does not generally kill birds directly. What it does is remove the food that birds need to raise their young. A single nesting pair of Carolina chickadees will bring between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars to a nest over 1 breeding cycle. Not insects generally, specifically caterpillars. A nestling chickadee in its first 2 weeks of life cannot process seeds or berries at all. The protein profile has to be that specific. If the insect population in a neighborhood has been suppressed by systemic lawn treatments for 4 or 5 consecutive seasons, those caterpillars are not there. The nest fails quietly. You never see a dead bird. You just gradually stop seeing chickadees. Not dramatically, not on a morning you'd mark on a calendar, just slowly, over years. The yard gets quieter. These 2 pathways have different causes and need different solutions. but they are running simultaneously in most suburban neighborhoods right now. And the birds in your yard are caught in both. Let me go into how the rodenticide chain actually works, because the mechanism is what makes it so persistent. The chemicals responsible for most of what we're talking about are called second-generation anticoagulant rodenticides, or SGARs. The second-generation label matters. First-generation rodenticides, warfarin, the older compounds, required multiple feedings and broke down relatively quickly in tissue. Second-generation compounds, specifically brodifacoum, bromadiolone, and diphethiolone, are designed to kill with a single feeding. They are persistent in fatty tissue. They work the same way in every mammal and bird that ingests them. They block vitamin K recycling, which prevents blood from clotting, which causes internal bleeding over a period of 3 to 7 days. That delay is the design feature that creates the food chain problem. A rat that has eaten a lethal dose of brodifacoum is not immediately incapacitated. It's moving. It's findable. Research from Cornell on urban raptor foraging behavior has documented the spatial memory these birds develop around residential properties. They know where the rats are, and they know that certain properties reliably produce catchable prey. What they cannot know is that the rat they are watching has already been marked. A slow rat, a slightly less alert rat, that isn't a warning to a Cooper's hawk. That's dinner. And brodifacoum accumulates. It stores in fatty tissue, and the concentration builds across multiple exposures. One rat may not carry enough to kill the hawk that catches it. 2 or 3 rats over the course of a week might. The research from the Predatory Bird Research Group at the University of California, Davis, testing that has gone on for more than 20 years, has found rodenticide residues in more than 75% of tested raptors in urban and suburban zones in some years. In the densest suburban areas of California, the percentage of tested birds showing at least one rodenticide compound has, in certain sampling periods, exceeded 90%. These are not birds that got into a bait station. These are birds doing exactly what raptors do, hunting the animals that live near people. The poison follows the rats. The hawk follows the rats. And the math, once you lay it out this way, is not subtle. There's a geographic argument I used to make to myself. This is a California problem, or a city problem, or a commercial pest control problem. I want to be honest about that argument. The compounds are the same. The prey animals are the same. The hawks are the same. The mechanism does not care which suburb you live in. The rat didn't do anything wrong. The hawk didn't do anything wrong. The chain doesn't require intent from anyone. The second pathway is pesticides. And I want to start here with a confession, because I think it's the only honest way to make this point without it sounding like a lecture. About 2 springs ago, I put down a granular lawn treatment for grubs along the back edge of my yard. I'd had Japanese beetle larvae for 2 consecutive summers, and they were wrecking the patch of ground I was trying to convert to native plants. The product I used was systemic, meaning the active ingredient gets absorbed by plant roots and distributed through the plant's tissue, and it was neonicotinoid-based, imidacloprid. I read the label. I noted the line about not applying near standing water. I noted the dry-in period. And then I put it down and went inside. I did not think about the Carolina wren nest under the back porch until I was a year into this research. I did not think about what was going to happen to the caterpillar population in that bed once the host plants absorbed the treatment. I was not trying to harm anything. I just was not thinking about the food chain at all. That is where I want to start with neonicotinoids, because I think most people who use them are exactly where I was, not trying to harm birds, just not seeing the rest of the system. Neonicotinoids are systemic insecticides. Imidacloprid, clothianidin, and thiamethoxam are the most common, and they are, as of the late 2010s, the most widely used class of insecticide on Earth. They work by binding to insect nervous system receptors and causing overstimulation. For insects, this is lethal. For birds, the effect is more complicated and, in some ways, more difficult to see. A study published in Science in 2019, research from the University of Saskatchewan, exposed white-crowned sparrows to doses of imidacloprid that fell well below what would be considered acutely lethal, not enough to kill, just enough to matter. The birds lost body mass. They stopped eating at the rate they needed to maintain condition for migration, and their departure was delayed by several days compared to unexposed birds. In migration, several days is not nothing. It is sometimes the difference between arriving on breeding grounds when conditions are right and arriving when the window has closed. The study did not show dead birds. It showed birds whose timing was off, and timing, for a migratory songbird, is everything. Bad timing is how a species declines without anyone seeing a single body. The thing I keep coming back to is that the label on the bag I used did not tell me any of this. The dry-in period was there. The water warning was there. What was not there was anything about the food chain below the plant or the birds nesting 20 feet away that would be foraging those treated beds for insects all summer. I don't know if the Carolina wren nest that year failed because of what I put down. I don't have a way to know that. But I know she spent that entire summer combing that exact patch of ground for insects to feed her nestlings. I watched her do it. What I know now is that I put a chemical into a system I didn't fully understand and let her do the foraging. And I want to be honest, I am not in a position to tell you I would have made a different choice if I had read everything I've since read. I might have. I'd like to think I would have. But I'm trying to be honest here about how easy it is to do this without realizing what you're part of. In 2019, a paper published in Science, research led by Cornell Lab, calculated that North America has lost approximately 3 billion birds since 1970. I want you to stop and try to picture that number. You can't. Nobody can see 3 billion empty spaces in the sky. What you actually see is just a morning in your yard that is slightly quieter than it was 5 years ago. You see a nesting season where the chickadees just don't come back. The loss isn't a dramatic headline. It is a slow, creeping silence. The methodology has been scrutinized. The number has held up. 3 billion. Aerial insectivores, swallows, swifts, nighthawks, the purple martins some of you are running nest box programs for in your backyards, declined by more than 30%, grassland birds by more than 50%, and species that most people assume are doing fine because they still see them occasionally. The eastern meadowlark, the common grackle, the dark-eyed junco, had in many cases lost 30 to 50% of their North American populations since your parents were young. This is not a study arguing for a specific regulatory response. It is a count. The birds that should be there are not there. Here is what I want to be careful about. This paper does not assign precise blame percentages to specific causes. It documents the loss. The follow-on research, work coming out of the University of Exeter and separately from the Max Planck Institute for Ornithology, has started to establish what's contributing. And pesticide exposure shows up consistently, not always as the single largest driver, but as one that compounds with everything else. Habitat loss, light pollution, window strikes, cat predation. A bird already under pressure from multiple directions, flying through a chemically treated neighborhood at night, is more vulnerable than a bird dealing with just one of those things. For raptors specifically, the Wildlife Center of Silicon Valley published data over a multi-year testing period showing rodenticide residues in virtually every bird of prey they received for rehabilitation or necropsy in their service area. Red-tailed hawks, Cooper's hawks, red-shouldered hawks, barn owls, great horned owls, burrowing owls. In multiple sampling years, Brodifacium was present in more than 80% of tested animals. This is not a local problem. This is not a rare species problem. This is not something that is happening to birds you have never heard of. It is present in the birds you watch every week in suburban neighborhoods that look, from the back porch on a Tuesday morning, like they are fine. I want to say clearly what the research can and cannot support. The mechanism is established. The presence of these chemicals in the birds is established. The concentrations are biologically meaningful. What researchers genuinely cannot pin down with precision yet is the annual mortality figure attributable specifically to secondary rodenticide poisoning in raptor populations. The numbers exist as ranges. The ranges are wide. Anyone who gives you a single confident number is working outside what the data can support, and I am not going to do that. What the data can support is this: the chain is real. The exposure is real. The birds in your neighborhood are at the end of it. So what does any of this mean for you, in your specific yard, in your specific neighborhood? Let me start with what is actually in your control, because one of the ways this topic fails people is that it gets overwhelming fast, and the overwhelming version leads to one of two places. Either you tune it out entirely, or you decide it's too big to do anything about, and you go back to filling the feeder and not thinking about it. I don't want either of those for you, because neither of them helps the birds. If you are using any lawn or garden product that is systemic, meaning it enters the plant, not just the surface, it's worth finding out whether it is neonicotinoid-based. Imidacloprid, clothianidin, and thiamethoxam appear under a lot of brand names at the garden center and in commercial lawn service programs. If your lawn service does an annual grub treatment or a blanket insecticide application, this is worth asking about specifically. The alternative is something entomologists call integrated pest management. I just call it looking at what you're actually doing. It means identifying the exact bug that is eating your tomatoes and dealing with just that bug. No broad-spectrum sprays, no chemical carpet bombing of the entire yard just because you saw a beetle you didn't like. For most suburban pest situations, safer alternatives exist. They are not always as convenient. They work. The native plant case matters here in a way that connects directly to the caterpillar numbers I mentioned earlier. Research from the University of Delaware, Doug Tallamy's work, which I'd point you toward if you want to go deeper on this, documented that a single mature native oak tree can support more than 500 caterpillar species. A lawn of non-native turf grass supports essentially none. If you're running a feeder and wondering why your yard doesn't feel as active as it used to, the plant composition is a significant variable. The feeder brings birds in. Native plants give them something to feed their young on. Those are two different things, and only one of them supports a functioning breeding population in your yard. If you find a bird on the ground that appears physically uninjured, not a window strike, no obvious cat encounter, just sitting there looking wrong, secondary rodenticide poisoning is one of the things worth considering. The symptoms follow what you'd expect from internal bleeding: lethargy, poor coordination, reluctance to flush when you approach. Your regional wildlife rehabilitator, or a raptor center if you find a larger bird, can often test for this. The Wild Bird Fund in New York, the Wildlife Center of Virginia, most regional rehab centers with raptor programs, they have seen this pattern and know what to look for. I cannot tell you, and I will not tell you, that addressing your own yard and your own products solves the problem at the scale it exists. It does not. One yard is not a neighborhood. The Cooper's hawk that works my fence line covers territory that includes 30 or 40 houses. What happens in my yard is a small fraction of what that bird is exposed to in a week. But I keep coming back to the phrase small fraction. A neighborhood isn't just a map. Every property in that hawk's territory that reduces its chemical burden is a real reduction in what that hawk accumulates. Because that is all a neighborhood actually is, the sum of 100 individual decisions. I want to come back to that hawk I mentioned at the beginning, the one that has been coming through for 3 winters now. The timing of its visits never really follows a rule. But what always follows a rule is the yard's response. Every time it clears that back fence, the titmice vanish, the cardinals freeze, the chickadees drop into the holly bush. There is a second or two where you can see the whole yard reorganize in real time, every bird making the same grim calculation about cover and distance. And then the hawk is the only thing moving. I have always found this beautiful. I want to be accurate about that. Even now, knowing what I know, there is something about watching a predator work a suburban yard that feels true in a way that the feeders and the sweet cages don't, on their own. The hawk is not supplemented. It is not accommodated. It is doing what it has always done, and the yard responds to it as the yard has always responded. What I think about differently now is what's inside it, the research I've been going through, the UC Davis studies, the Wildlife Center data, the raptor rehab numbers from across the eastern U.S. Bukai says that a Cooper's hawk working a suburban neighborhood is almost certainly carrying some level of rodenticide load in its liver. Not necessarily a fatal accumulation, not necessarily something I would be able to see from my kitchen window. But there is an arithmetic consequence to hunting the prey animals of a neighborhood that uses the chemicals this neighborhood uses. And the hawk has no way to know that. It is doing exactly what a Cooper's hawk is supposed to do. I'm not going to tell you watching it now is the same as watching it was. I'm not going to tell you it's ruined. What I can tell you is that it has changed what the yard means to me, not from something good to something bad, but from something local to something larger. The hawk is hunting a system, and the system has things in it that the hawk has no way to see and no way to avoid. I keep coming back to the phrase, no way to avoid, because we built the chain. All of us who live in a neighborhood with pristine lawns and pest control and garbage cans, we create the habitat, and then we poison it. We are the architects of that chain. The question I'm sitting with, and I don't have a clean answer yet, is what we owe the birds once we realize we are the ones they are flying through. When I started paying attention to my backyard 5 years ago, I thought I was watching birds. I was watching birds. But the more I've learned, the more I understand that what I'm watching is a system. One that extends past the back fence, past the holly bush, past the property line of anything I own or have any control over. The hawk will come back this week. I don't know the exact day. What I'm sure of is that when it comes, the yard will go quiet in that specific way, and I'll be at the kitchen window with my coffee, and I will be grateful for it. None of that changes. What changes is what I owe that attention. I think that's what I've been trying to say throughout this whole video. Not that backyard birding is complicated, or that the hobby has a shadow I need to warn you about. Just that the yard you are watching is bigger than the yard. And what you learn about how it works is a kind of responsibility. Not the guilty kind, not the lecture kind, just the ordinary kind that comes from paying close attention to something for long enough that you start to understand what it actually is. Have you seen this? A raptor behaving strangely, a bird on the ground that seemed wrong somehow, a morning in your yard that got quieter in a way you couldn't explain? I want to know if you've seen it too. Tell me below. I read everyone. I'll see you in the next one.